Hello, Lumen employees, refiners, and fellow mudbeards. And today I wanted to bring you guys one more Severance video before we eventually take a break until the next season comes around. And with this video, I wanted to touch on the subject of the goats. Yes, while we did get some answers in the season finale of Severance, there's still a lot of questions left lingering in the air about what the goats could actually be used for. Yes, it's obvious they're being used as a sacrifice, but where was the inspiration for such an archaic practice? And how does it represent its place within the show narratively? I'm going to share my personal thoughts and then a theory I found on Reddit that I think really hammers in the nail on what the goats could actually be used for in this finale. So, in my eyes, the goats are confirmation that the show does tangle with the spiritual realm in some way. And while I'm not saying that necessarily there's going to be some ghost or spirit of Kyr that comes up from the ground, I do think that this clues us into the fact that the religious worship of Kyr isn't just him as a person, but more as a deity. And I think we've gotten a lot of Kyr context throughout this season to tell us exactly why. And it would also explain the employees of Lumen's severe dedication to Kyr as a whole. See, within Lumen, we can find that there is a civil divide. There's a lot of conflict that we see built up between the administrative side and the Egans. And while this conflict could come to fruition in the next season, I mainly want to talk about how that conflict was utilized to tell us the differences between who is in Lumen to worship Kyr and who is in Lumen to reap the benefits of the Egan family name. The Egan family as a whole, we know, will just take whatever they can and use it to their benefit so that they can reap the rewards. Hence why Cobell's astonishing work was used by Jaime and she was sent off. Now, back to the goats. How does sacrificing a goat around the same time that Cold Harbor could have been finished correlate to this entire process? Well, to touch on that, we have to think about Cold Harbor. See, Cold Harbor at the very end was a room Gemma had gone into where she was going to take apart and dismantle a crib. We've seen throughout the story that sometimes there is bleed-throughs of an innie and an outie's personality, and that sometimes emotions can actually carry weight all the way through. Referenced even all the way back in season 1, where Petey talked about how he and Mark could tell something was off. Now we know that Mark had created 24 different versions of innies for Gemma to inhabit. My theory is that with so many innies, they were able to slowly grind away whatever personalities she had or fine-tune them into certain categories to leave the most empty husk of a person that they possibly could. How they test this is one final room that heavily relates to a significant moment within their lives. That crib carries a lot of narrative and emotional weight to Gemma's story. So her going and dismantling it should have triggered some sort of emotional response if there was any bleed through happening between her innies and that blank slate. Hence why Dr. Maurer would reference things like the barrier's holding and how beautiful it is, and how she feels nothing. This clues us into the fact that their goal is to see no emotional response from her whatsoever. And in my head, Lumen's goal is to create a perfectly blank slate of a person to easier resurrect somebody else. We always see in possession stories how it's always a battle for control over the body. And I think, given the severing technology is still relatively new, their goal is to find a way to either completely control emotions at a moment's whim, or leave someone devoid of all human emotions they could reintegrate somebody else within them, i.e. Kyr or someone close to Kyr. But why sacrifice goats? See, if this whole process is inspired by Kyr and the original severing that was disclosed within the 4th appendix, we see the story of him going out with Dieter into the woods, and even though it's displayed to us in a very weird and allegoric way, we do find that there is some clues there that kind of tell us how Kyr became the first ever severed. And I have a video going further into that if you want to check it out. Point is, I know the story references Dieter as a twin brother, but I believe that Dieter is actually just the first version of an innie and outie. See, we know that the Egans in general really prefer control or balancing of the tempers in some way. Basically emotional stability, or in their eyes emotional stability. And in the story describing Dieter and Kyr, Dieter is very much frolicking, very much playing music, and very much feeling the artistic nature of the world around him. My idea is that Kyr had either severed himself or propelled an idea that he had severed himself and found a way to perfectly balance his tempers and or control his emotions. Helly even joked about the fact that Dieter could have just been pleasuring himself, which could be a clue into the idea of a personality that the Egans would want to control. More evidence to this theory is found with the birthing retreat. Another YouTuber that covers Severance video, Nika Nag, had pointed out the fact that Jaime as a person has potentially had more offspring, and that we could have potentially seen some of said offspring already. This ties into another popular theory around the internet, and that's that Rickon is an Egan. Is it possible that Rickon was born into one of these birthing retreats? and he didn't have enough cure within him for Jaime or the rest of the Egans to want to keep him within Lumen? We know personality-wise he very much lives up to par with the rest of the weirdness that is Lumen's staff and employees. My theory is that if the worship of cure is actually tied to the supernatural, then it could be them sacrificing this goat is confirmation of such a thing. A ritualistic sacrifice could be indicative or help propel the final severing of a Gemma to create this perfectly empty husk. We know they have killed the goats before in a sacrifice due to Gwendolyn's reactions. We also know that the goat was being sacrificed was displaying verve and wow.
Has it verve?
It does.
Wiles.
The most of its flock.
Which would just basically illustrate that it had a lot of life to give. So my theory is if Kier long ago had found a way to miraculously sever or biologically sever himself, and ever since then his family and people that his family has employed have been trying to replicate such a process, then we get to the point where Harmony Cobell actually invented a medical procedure to accomplish just that. I believe that as Lumen and the Egans started fine-tuning their craft into more of a medical advancement scientific type of corporation, they still carry the deep, subtle ties to ritualistic spiritualism, which I think is also a good parallel between some of these big corporations or industries where there's an idea or tinfoil conspiracy that there's like an Illuminati or a sacrificial type of group of people that work behind these things. So at the end of the day, it could be indicative of just the darker side of corporations and how behind every huge corporation riddled with technology, there is a deep, weird worship of some spiritual deity. But that, of course, is a mudlove theory, so that's definitely going to be a tinfoil one. Let me go ahead and read you guys a Reddit theory I found that I think is much more objectively accurate to what the show was trying to portray. A user going by the name of Art and Hot Sauce basically said, the goats are kept by Lumen for a ritualistic sacrifice they perform when they complete the testing protocol they've been using on Gemma, and probably other times as well. Obviously, this is not the first time they've done this, as the Goat Queen had clearly been forced to perform the sacrifice many times before. Quote to the quote of the man, they're not ready. He was the man feeding them and begging them not to be taken and killed. His entire existence was caring for these little goats, so to watch them be taken over and over is emotionally horrific. As far as the way this fits into the larger show, any Mark was expected to sacrifice his existence for the greater good, because apparently it's so obvious that his existence is too small and meaningless to even matter in the first place. In fact, Devin and Audi Mark expect him to destroy the existence of every innie on the floor without a second thought, because they view them as so insignificant. Lumen creates and destroys innies left and right, and don't care about them at all. They don't even allow the innies to acknowledge the pain they feel when they lose each other. The Go is the thematic parallel to the outside worlds and Lumen's view of the innies. That's what they've been building. The idea that the innies goats are viewed as being so inconsequential that they should just happily die for the benefit of the outside world. But in the end, we were rooting for Emil. We wanted him to live. We saw the connection the Goat Queen had to him and that it mattered to her. And we saw/felt the same thing between Helly and Innie Mark. Lumen views these small lives as being nothing but a sacrifice to cure, with no inherent value. Helly, Innie Mark, and Emil feel very differently. At the end of the day, I think Art and Hot Sauce had perfectly captured what the show was trying to tell us, and that the goats were very representative of the lives of the innies and how insignificant they seem. At the end of the day, Lumen and most people outside of Lumen see innies as nothing more than a means to an end, a tool, cattle, or even livestock. And while some are more aggressive about it, like Drummond, I feel that Devin and Audi Mark are a perfect example of how some of us will neglect the mistreatment of others just because it doesn't really pertain to our own personal circumstances. So while it might be a little disappointing to not have a more fine-tuned tether to what the goat's sacrifice could actually entail for the series, I believe that if we look at it narratively and how Art and Hot Sauce had displayed it here for us, it's really just to help represent the themes of the show. That being said, I've really enjoyed covering Severance this year. It's been a lot of fun, very good season, definitely something I can't stop thinking about, but I'm interested to see what you guys think. Did you prefer season 1 or season 2? What did you like more about either or? And do you think there's maybe more to this goats than I've displayed in this video? Either way, let me know down in the comments. Appreciate you guys all for tuning in, and remember, if you want to sacrifice a goat, you better make a meal out of it. Yesterday.